So, talking about justification and text here. So you gotta get your type palette there, and in the paragraph tab, you have your justification here. So if you click this, right now it's left justification, and you can go to center, right, justify full, which isn't going to work with this one, I don't think. Usually it takes the last line and spreads it out, but I probably don't have enough text. So that's your justification there. In your character, you can set your font. Usually you can type in the first letter to go to that position. Okay, so that's justification, and then if you want to change your point size, you can find it right there. So I can change this to 45, enter. There's some other features in here, but they're more desktop publishing, so we're not going to do too much with them. So when you're doing some of your exercises, it's usually the easiest just to get your typing in first and then format second, as opposed to doing it as you go, which we can do, right? Like if I start a string here and want this to be 20 points, it will be 20 points. If I change it to 40 from this point forward, 40, enter, from this point forward, it'll take on that. But it's usually easiest to get your typing in and format after. You can do a spell check, but just know that it's not always easy to spot an error, because that word to is correct, so it's not going to pick it up, so you still have to proofread. But this is definitely a spelling error. So if we go to type, check spelling, it definitely finds it, but it doesn't have any suggested corrections. It does know that it's wrong, so we're just going to say done. But that's where the spell check is found, right there. You can take anything here, and you need to select it first, and then you can go to type, change the case, and go to lowercase. And when you click off, it's lowercase. Or you can select it and go to mixed case, and that should put a capital at the front of each word, and the rest is lowercase. You can also take a string and come here and change the orientation to make it vertical. Usually when you're working, if I'm in the select tool, I can just double click in a text string and it'll turn to the text tool. After that, if I double click, it usually selects a word, which is probably like most programs, and 3 clicks, 1, 2, 3, usually gets the sentence. We've talked about the group tool already. This one here, the select groups. So I've shown that example that if we have a polar grid here and we come to the tool for selecting out of a group, when we do the first click, it will isolate a single entity. If I click twice, 1, 2, it gets the entire subgroup. So you can isolate using that without having to ungroup everything. In the exercises, we're going to do some work with swatches. So be careful, there's a few on here. This is the one I'm talking about right now, just this one here, swatches. So if you're working with swatches, when you work with these, they can actually be dragged and dropped. onto here. There's also some swatches for gradient fills, and I think you can isolate them down here. Do you see that this time I'm only showing the solid colors? There's your gradient fills, there's your patterns, and this is going to give everything to us. So there are a few patterns in here as well. So you can use these convenient swatches, but let's say that you fill something with a custom color and you want to maintain, you want that color to be available, you can drag it in and then you have it in there so that if you made something else and you needed that color, you can go over and get it. But this is what happens because I had an outline on it, it's showing. So you have to experiment a bit with that. There's also swatch libraries in here, right there, and there's a number of them that you can work with. So here's one for earth tones. There's earth tones, and let's say we wanted to open another swatch library of focal tone. There's focal tone. You see it open in the same palette, but just so you know, probably like your other Adobe things, your palettes can get separated. So again, you can drag and drop from the swatches, which is kind of nice. The other thing is most people know the eyedropper in here. So if I have this object and I want it to be that color, you go with the eyedropper and get it. You guys have probably learned that one. But here's one that I notice people, by default we're in CMYK. I notice that people get out of it by accident. So to get back into it, there's a few different ways. You can press the shift key and click on this rainbow. That takes us to the RGB, grayscale, RGB, HSB, and then back there. The other way you can do it is with this arrow. You can choose the one that you want. If you're printing out materials, though, we want to be in that one. If you're designing a web page, then you'd want to be in RGB. But for now, we'll just stay there. Gradient fills. If we want to put a gradient fill on here, just going to close this out. We can come over to here, this gradient, and again those arrows tell us there's more. So let's open it all up. I can put this gradient fill on there and I can change it to a linear fill, and I can change the angle of the fill. I can also adjust this little triangle to get more white or more black. And if I don't want a black and white fill, that's what we get by default, I can take these little, I call them paint cans. I don't know what they are, but that's what I think of them. So if I click the first one and I choose a color, it'll come in. Click the second one, choose a color, it'll come in. If I want to have a rainbow, I can click underneath here and add in as many colors as I want. Okay, so that is gradient fill. So you have that linear or the radial from the center out. Then we have the mesh tool. So I have a rectangle here and I have it in default. This is my mesh tool here. This one is tough. People lose their entities all the time. And it's because when you come to the mesh tool, you put a mesh point on. I'll just put one pretty much on the center here. It turns your stroke off. Right now, if you get out of this tool, I have students say all the time, I did it, it's disappeared. It is there. After you put a mesh tool, that anchor point that you just created is selected. It is possible right now to go and get a color and put it in that anchor point, and we can continue putting on more anchor points, which will retain the last choice or change them. But right now I want to put colors in here. I can stay in the mesh tool and I can come and select, but if I miss it, if I don't have any colors in there, again, my object's going to disappear. So it's safest, whenever you're going to do more work with the anchor points, come over to that direct select tool. And then I can use a marquee select, or, oh, see how it disappeared? So I have to go get it. And that's not what I want, so I'm going to shift click on my rainbow and go and get a color. I can select more than one, I'm sure, with the shift key and put the same color on all of them. So the mesh is really a pretty effect. If I go back in here and I isolate one of these anchor points, you'll see that you have handles and you can manipulate them. We're going to learn more about them, but for now, just to know that you can pull them around and get a different effect. So that's mesh. I want to talk about stroke. Is found right here. Again, click the little arrows up here to make sure you have everything showing, and this is where I can put a thicker stroke on here. Now I can also come with a closed object. It's this one, this join. Right now this is the default, but I can change those corners. I'm going to put a bigger one on so you can see it. Do you see how it's a rounded corner now as opposed to there? Or I can get a bevel corner. I can also, this cap one, that's for if you had a line segment. If you have a line segment and you want the end to be round, or this one just changes the position of where the anchor point is. This anchor point is right at the ends, and that one is sort of enclosed in them. Let's put a longer line here. This one here, we can turn it to a dashed line, and we can tell it what we want the sequence to be. Right now it's 12 points. Now I should probably change to inches here, and I am, so it's going, okay, thank you. Alright, so let's do that. Let's do 0.5 inch. And it's actually converted it back to points, which is kind of, so let's make the, yeah, okay, let's make the gap 1/4 of an inch. And 36, oh no, 36 points, yeah, let's do that. So we can actually start getting some kind of sequence, but I don't know that we're going to do too much of that, but just so you know where it is. And then the last thing is the align palette. So if we have a few objects and we want to be able to align them, we're going to use this palette here, window, align. And so think of it this way. The two first buttons are horizontal alignment buttons. I don't know why my little banner boxes aren't coming up to tell us, but I know that these are the two horizontal, which means the objects are going to move horizontally to align. So it, yeah, left to right, as opposed to this way, right. So if I select them all, I need one more click to say which one's the boss, which one doesn't move. So let's make them move to the circle. So you click there, and when I hit the left, they come over to the left. If I did the middle, of course, they go in the middle or the right. So those are your horizontal. These ones, I'm going to just undo that. Just move them around a bit. If I select them all, and this time I can align them to the top of the yellow circle. So you also have to remember to do that last click, because if you don't, you're going to get a message. Let's do them in the middle. Oh, it knew. Okay. Sometimes you're going to get a message. I have a whole new object, so let's see what happens. This one. Sometimes if it doesn't know where the key object is, you will get a message that says no key object, and then you know that you forgot to make a click. So that's what these ones do. You can also use these ones, distribute spacing. So if I take all of these, make that the key object, and ask them to do, let's put in 0.25 IN, enter, and do this one. They've all done a vertical movement, and they are all 1/4 of an inch between them. And if I do that one, same thing. There's 1/4 of an inch vertically. The distribute, so then I'd have to come back here to get them all on the same line. So the align tools are pretty good. And the last thing is, if you forgot to turn your page on landscape when you get a new page, because you know that this one gives us that option of portrait. If you forget, then you're just going to go to your document setup. You can do it there and say OK. But before you do, you also have to change it. We've just changed the landscape. You have to also change it on your print setup right there to landscape, or you're going to run into trouble when you print. So when I say OK, it will turn it for you.